Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Karen Robards about Some Murders in Berlin. Karen is a New York Times, a USA Today, and a Publishers Weekly best-selling author of over 50 novels. And she has also won 6 Silver Pen Awards. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here, Dan.
Thank you. I am so excited to talk about this magnificent masterpiece that you've created. It is
thank you.
It's both what I would say it's a historical novel that's also a bit of an educational novel. At least so I learned some things in here that just blew me away. I just loved it. Can you give the audience an overview of what Some Murders in Berlin is about?
Well, it's about some murders in Berlin. First of all, I mean, that's the heart of the book. But it's set in 1943, and my female character, my main character, is a profiler, a Danish profiler, and she must go from Copenhagen, Denmark, to Berlin. She has been summoned to help solve a serial killer, some serial killings in Berlin, and she has secrets that she can't reveal, or it'll get her and her family killed. So she has no choice but to go. She takes with her 2 of her compatriots, 2 fellow professors who are in the Danish resistance. And they are looking for one of them, Jens, and he's been wounded. They're searching the university. So she takes Pia and Jens with her to Copenhagen. They get there right as another horrific murder has been committed. And they go to the site and they meet Detective Kurt Schneider. And he is with the Kripo, that is the homicide division for the Third Reich, for the police department. And he has secrets of his own too. And they must work together to find who is killing these women. There have been 8 murders so far. And if they don't, it's going to cost them both their lives. And they have to keep it on the hush-hush because Berlin, the Third Reich is in a bad way right then. They are losing the war. And they're trying to hold it all together and make the public think, their own public think, that they're winning and everything is good. So they can't have a serial killer running amok in Berlin right at that moment. So everything is done under a veil of secrecy and in the very heart of darkness it is Berlin. And so all these other horrific things are happening around them. But Elin and Kurt have to find this killer, and they have a very abbreviated time to do so, or their whole lives will unravel. So that's the premise.
It was so magically revealed to us. I mean, you take your time, which is something that I really, really enjoy. There's so many layers of the onion that get to be peeled back, and we get to see a nice thing I will compliment you on. I love the fact that both Elin and Kurt are strong characters. You've given us 2 characters that are not full of tropes. You've given us 2 successful characters who really have a goal, which is to find a serial killer. But you don't make them, you made me proud of them. I wanted to root for them from the beginning to the end. Was that fun or challenging? And the reason I ask that is because I think when you have 2 strong characters, I would imagine that you have a little bit harder job as an author to make sure that you keep them strong. Is that correct or not correct?
I don't have any trouble making strong characters because I try to get inside both of them as I write them. And you see the world from their point of view. And both of them were under such pressure, under such constraints, and they had so many other things going on than this murder that could get them killed, that they had to be strong or they weren't going to survive. And not only they weren't going to survive, but their families and the people depending on them were not going to survive. There was a lot going on in this book.
There is a lot going on, and you have so masterfully set up the fact that they both have things that they're striving for, not only to find the killer, but to keep themselves alive as well as their families. And you did that, you gave both of them a family that they both loved. And I mean, I know that might sound a little trite, but it's important because it gets them. They're always on the edge,
It
and
ups the stakes.
it does indeed.
And I have three sons of my own. And you when you're in danger yourself, it's one thing. But if your children are in danger, there's not much you wouldn't do. And that's not only Elin. Kurt had the same thing going on. And so that just made them in so much more danger because repercussions would hit their loved ones if they did not succeed and they did not get quietly back to their lives.
We're in a fortunate position that none of us currently have to go through what Elin and Kurt went through. But I do think I found some parallels. Sadly, I think what we're seeing is, like, in this country, the state of Tennessee has 21 anti-LGBTQ laws on the books, with 3 more in consideration. They have tons of book banning, and these are some of the things that we saw, in World War II, where governments were creating all of these things to divide the people. And it's
terrifying is what it is.
It is terrifying. It really is, because we have learned so many lessons, thankfully, and some lessons have obviously been forgotten.
Well, that's it. Each generation has to relearn the lessons because they do forget. They don't, well, I didn't experience World War II, but it was close enough where you heard people who had, and now it's all being forgotten. And I hope we don't have to go through it all again. I mean,
I hope
all
not.
The separations.
Yes.
And the demonizations.
Yes, absolutely, Karen. One beautiful thing you did is you gave us Kurt, who is a strong person and a strong character, and he protects Elin in a lot of ways that sometimes she doesn't see it to begin with. That's some of that onion peeling we get to go through. But you also give him some things where Elin gets to turn around and be his protector. And that was so heartfelt. I just loved it.
Thank you. Because they have to open up to each other, and trust has to be established. And vulnerability establishes trust. So he had to have some vulnerabilities too. But I really liked Kurt. He was actually a decent man caught up in this nightmare, and there was no way out of it really, but he was doing what he could.
And I think that perfectly describes what I felt as a reader. You felt like, here is a man that, because of the situation he's in, and I can't even begin to imagine what it was like, and don't want to know really what it was like during World War II, because it was so horrific for so many people. And as I know you so point out in the book, they couldn't trust anyone. I mean, they were always going outside of the building to get in the car to have a conversation, because you never knew what ears were listening. And you did such a great job as showing us, not just the two of them, but showing what happens when people want to impress the Fuhrer or impress someone up the ladder. They would throw someone under the bus at the drop of a hat.
They really did. They had tip lines. People could call and report their neighbors, report their friends, and people did it. That was the thing. Do you remember that scene where the waitress came out of the restaurant that they were eating at because they had asked about the 2 children that she might have seen? And the first thing she said is there a reward? I mean, they were turning people against their fellow citizens. And really, it was awful. You could not trust anybody.
You could not. And I've met a couple of survivors of World War II, and that's the point that I always come away from hearing them talk about. The fact is, neighbor against neighbor, person against person, and oftentimes for a reward. And it's like, where's the humanity? I mean, and of course, I think that's a simple thing to say, because, truthfully, if you're in fear of your life, oftentimes we do things to other people because we're in fear. And I think that's, obviously a thread that runs through this book, the fear of what might happen.
And did happen to millions of people, actually.
Yes.
But they would come and get people right off the streets, right out of their houses. If your neighbor reported you, say you were harboring a Jew, they'd come and get you.
Absolutely.
And there was nothing you could do. You could run and hide, but
well, and they were intent on finding. One of the things that you did so well is in some of the higher ups, both in Haupt and Keltbrunner, they described humans. They would often talk about Jews and homosexuals and Slavs and gypsies, and there were all of these boxes of people that were dispendable or disposable.
Yes.
And one of them says to Elin, after listing all of these people that the serial killer might be, he then goes on to say, but of course it's not an Aryan person because none of those people would ever do anything like that. And I'm like, oh, wow, good. So there she's put in a position of make sure you don't point at the wrong person or a person that we like. And I thought, wow, what a situation to be in.
Well, it was. And those were the true attitudes of the time. I mean, I did a lot of research, and it put her in danger to say that the killer was possibly an Aryan. They wanted her, they didn't care if they got the killer. That's the truth.
No.
They just wanted somebody to blame for it, and they wanted them to be of a specific group.
Yes.
So they could just, say, got him. He's a bad person anyway. Let's just kill him.
So of your other novels, is this the only one that's set in World War II, or are there others?
Black Swan of Paris is about a star, a singer in Paris at the time of the right before D-Day, and how she spies. She uses her position as a singer to spy on the Nazis and to help D-Day come about. Black Swan of Paris, Genevieve. I love that book. And then The Girl from Guernica was the one before this one. The Girl from Guernica is about Picasso's painting Guernica and the horrific bombing of the village of Guernica in Spain right before World War II. It was about 1938. And that was the first time that the Nazis had used their air force to come down, and they had something called a blitzkrieg. Mm-hmm. They practiced it on that village, and they wiped that village out. It was horrible. So this young girl was there. Oh gosh, Sybil, and she and her family, they were there, and some of them made it out, and some of it didn't. But that turned her against the Nazis, and she had to go back to Germany and act as a spy for the British resistance, the British espionage agencies that were serving there. So that's The Girl from Guernica and Black Swan of Paris. And then Some Murders in Berlin is the third one.
I love it. Absolutely love it. And, thank God there are people who do stand up, because it is important to stand up and do the right thing. It's not always easy, but it is always the right thing to do.
Well, it takes a lot of courage. They put their lives on the line. They put everything on the line.
Yes.
The best that'll happen to them is they'll go to prison and lose everything they own. And a lot worse, did you know that they were cutting off spies' heads? Women's heads. They had guillotines.
I did not know that.
I didn't either. Black Swan of Paris. I did a lot of research. That's what they did. They really did. They had guillotines in the middle of the prisons, and they would just cut off their heads, which was horrific.
It is horrific. And, may we never, ever go back to that again. And may we never forget either, because it's so important. I think that some people have said that, they don't want to think about history, but I think we have a responsibility to think about history. We have a responsibility to tell it and to tell it accurately, because if we do forget, then we are destined to repeat for sure.
Yes. It's important to learn the lessons of the past, and you can see it. You can see it that it's starting. You have to be very careful, because it could come back, maybe not in exactly the same way, but intolerance is always there, and it's always a threat, and it has to be dealt with. It's got to be tamped out. It can take root.
Totally agree. So I do want to highlight one lovely thing that I did not know, that I did look up. I fact-checked you, Karen. I shouldn't have, but I did anyway.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I fact-checked the fact that so many Danish Jewish people were able to escape to Sweden. That warmed my heart so much, because, so many people did not make it. But the fact that something like 90% or more of them were able to escape to Sweden is such a blessing.
It is. And that tells you those people basically were looking out for their neighbors. There wasn't anti-Semitism per se in Denmark, before the Nazis got there, they were all just one big happy society. And when push came to shove, they helped their neighbors go. And the good thing, the other thing, they kept their houses, they kept their businesses, they kept everything they had going. And when they came back, it was there waiting for them, which I thought was such a testament, actually, to the Danish people, and such a testament to the goodness of human beings, really, underneath.
I totally agree. And I felt that, as I said, it warmed my heart. It was so wonderful to read because it does give hope. Because I mean, hope is the one thing, in war, you hope you live, you hope to do well, you hope your family does. I mean, you have to have hope, but to see that played out was so beautiful.
Yeah, that's the absolute truth. Actually, I try to be pretty accurate. I do a lot of research. Uh, if there's something in there that's wrong, it got by me, but I don't think so.
Well, no, and I know that from seeing you on other podcasts and
Uh,
listening to you. I know how much research you put into your books, and so for me, that's a good thing because I like to know that I've read something that
it's
I've
accurate.
learned something and it's accurate because it is important. I mean, if you're writing a fantasy, that's great if you create your own world, but when you're repeating a world that has existed, accuracy is so important.
Well, I write other genres too. I write thrillers. I write a lot of stuff. Um, and it's not that important to be accurate, but with history, with historical fiction, and I think that these have important messages, actually, not to say that I'm writing an important book, but it has to be accurate as far as I'm concerned, because you can't convey the horror of it if you're just making it up. You don't have to make up horror. There was horror, you
Yes,
know?
I laugh nervously at that because it's a sad thing that there is that kind of knowledge that we do know the horrors of that war was just beyond.
The
So
horror that people could do that to other people. That was
totally.
it. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I said, they couldn't have known. The German people could not have known that this was going on, the concentration camps and everything. And he said, they knew, but you don't like to think that they knew and did nothing. I don't, I, some of, they didn't know, all of them, they couldn't have, because
No,
that's just evil.
I agree with you, Karen. I don't think everyone knew. I think enough knew. I think so. One thing that I learned probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm happy I learned it, but sort of ashamed it took this long to know about the American concentration camps against the Japanese American
Japanese.
people. It's hard to imagine that we learn in history about how horrific the rest of the world was, but we rarely want to examine our own position in that kind of hatred.
But you have to. I mean, you have to acknowledge our faults too, because the
Yes,
whole point is not to repeat them. I mean, they're done. We can't do anything about it. But going forward, we have to look at what we've done, what they've done, what everybody's done, and not do it again. This is what history is for, to teach us to be better people, I think.
absolutely, absolutely. I described you as an author to a friend of mine that I said I think Karen Robards is the atmospheric queen, and by that I mean there are little things in your novel that are just you can feel the dust and the dirt and you can taste it, and I think that's so fun as a reader when I get a book that's like that. So congratulations, well done.
Thank you.
So I know that this is freshly out. Are you
Yes.
working on something else? I know
Oh,
that's sort of
yes.
a strange thing to say since we're celebrating some murders in Berlin, but what are you working on next?
I am working on another work of historical fiction, and I really can't talk about it right now. But yes, I am always working on something next. I have been writing since I was 24 years old, and I don't think there's ever been any period in that time, in fact, I know there hasn't, that I haven't been writing a book. I'm always writing a book. It's what I do.
I love that. So now that perfectly sets up. Do you have a website or social media you'd like to share so we can learn when you can tell us the news? We'll be able to find it firsthand.
I have everything. I have a website, KarenRobards.com. I have Facebook, author Karen Robards. I have Twitter, which is now X, the Karen Robards, which I had to have because there are other Karen Robards. Okay. Instagram is author Karen Robards. I always feel funny about the Karen Robards, but there's another one out there. In fact, there are a couple. So, and I'm on TikTok, author Karen Robards.
I
So
love
I'm
it.
there. Yeah.
I love it. I love
Yeah,
it. So we
see.
should be able to find you, and I'll be looking forward to the news when it breaks. But until then, I am currently celebrating Some Murders in Berlin. It is absolutely magical and fantastic. Thank you,
Thank you,
Karen.
Dan, very much. I appreciate it.
And I appreciate you being here. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.